what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I've got a couple of interesting stories for you guys today. The first story that I've got for you guys today, we've got a couple new physique updates and just overall updates with Carlos Thomas Jr. So I saw this update. It was actually just posted less than an hour ago at the time that I'm recording this video. And we are just slightly under 7 weeks out now from the 2025 Arnold Classic, which Carlos is preparing for. But I also saw that both Fouad and Carlos confirmed that Carlos will also be doing the Detroit Pro, which he's going to be 10 weeks out from here. And we're also going to talk about Goodvito in a second here too, whom we also got a physique update from at 10 weeks out from the Detroit Pro. And if you guys remember last year, I feel like that's kind of become, it is a new show, but it was kind of a very important show for two relatively new guys, both Martin and Goodvito, kind of launching a very successful year for Martin and a very successful launch for Vito. And you guys know how I feel about Carlos. I've spoken very highly of him and his physique so far. He's one of the young guys that I think has the potential to take it a very long way. So I'm hoping he has a similar career trajectory, starting out with the Arnold, but the Detroit Pro could be a very big, important show for his career too. Even if an Arnold Classic win seems a little bit more far-fetched, winning a show like Detroit I think would still be huge. And getting to the Olympia just in general, I think, is probably his goal for 2025. Now, to be honest, as far as the video update goes, I was a little bit concerned with the midsection, and I was also a little bit concerned with the fact that he still hasn't showed his back. His back has been a big point of criticism for him, but the midsection in particular, if you remember last year when he had to pull out of a show or two, the reason for that was he had some stomach issues. I don't remember exactly what the condition was, but it was some kind of gastrointestinal issue that he had, and that's what caused him to pull out from, I believe, the New York Pro. And I can't quite put my finger on it, like looking at his midsection, there's just something that looks a little bit off about it. I wouldn't really quite say that it's distended, but just something looks a little off, and I kind of wonder if that's attributed to what he was going through with his gastrointestinal thing. Especially if you look at like the lower ab area, like when he flexes, even the top couple sets of abs look good, but even when he flexes, that lower area looks a little bit off. And again, we're kind of getting into crunch time here at 7 weeks out. But I mean, aside from the midsection, all my same compliments of Carlos still stand. Insanely round in 3D with the arms, crazy legs. Still, from a taper perspective, even if the midsection looks a little bit off, the taper for a guy with legs that big, having a waist that small, is crazy. And I actually wanted to show Goodvito's update. So Goodvito posted an update today. And again, this would be 10 weeks out from Detroit. And Vito is also doing several other shows in the 2025 season. Vito looks really impressive. And I actually wanted to take his update and put it side by side with Carlos Thomas Jr.'s front double bicep update, which would also be, again, 7 from the Arnold, but 10 weeks out from the Detroit. Just to showcase what I'm talking about here with Carlos and Goodvito both being two of the young, newer, up-and-coming guys, just to show how talented both these guys really are. They've got pretty different physiques, but both in their own way have a really insane front double bicep. And Vito as well has really insane legs. And I think the fact that we're going to get to see both of these guys in the same competition in Detroit is going to be really entertaining, because I've said before that I think last year's Detroit Pro with Martin and Goodvito as the top two, I think was one of the closest and most exciting top twos that we had that entire year. And maybe we could see something comparable with Goodvito and Carlos. They both have insane physiques in their own right. I mean, you look at Goodvito's quads, just not only the size, but the separation of his quads. And if you look back at the photos from Detroit last year, he brought really good conditioning. And like I said, it was close between him and Martin. And look at the year that Martin went on to have. And we never really got to see Goodvito do, a bigger level show like the Arnold, Ohio, or the New York Pro, or the Olympia. So we don't know where he would stack up with the current best in the world. But I have a feeling that the physique that we're going to see from Vito in Detroit, I believe he also said he's going to try to do New York and Pittsburgh. And I think he may have also mentioned Dubai. But I'm really interested to see him on stage with these kind of more established guys. Because at the time, even though Martin had a crazy year in 2024, at the time that he did the Detroit Pro, he wasn't really established yet as one of the top guys. Then you got to see him go head-to-head with Nick in New York. Then you got to see him top 4 at the Olympia. So at the time that he faced Goodvito, he wasn't quite the Martin Fitzwater that we're talking about now, even though he looked insane at that show. So I want to see Vito in the mix with more guys that are established top guys and see how he stands with them. But then also, I want to get to see him be challenged by a new guy that's not an established top guy like Carlos Thomas Jr. I want Carlos to bring it and become one of the top guys. I hope that 2025 becomes a year that we get to see more guys like made, have their careers established, become a talking point, become a big name. And I think Carlos could be one of those guys. I think Goodvito could be one of those guys. And that's what I'm hoping to see in 2025. I mean, think about the years like where Nick Walker first hit the scene, where Michael Krizo first hit the scene, the first time Andrew Jacked competed in the IFBB, or even in 212. I mean, think about how recently it was, just a few years ago, that Keon was almost last place at the 212 Olympia. And now he's won it twice. I want to see who that next guy is going to be that has a crazy breakout year. Is it going to be Goodvito? Is it going to be Carlos? Who's the next guy like a Nick Walker that we're going to be talking about for, 5 years to come? I mean, I remember when Nick won his pro card, I remember making a video about that and saying, this guy, he's got potential to be a really, really big thing. I remember when he won that first New York Pro, and that was kind of his breakout. The Arnold that year, the New York Pro, that was like his breakout year because his first pro show, I think he placed like 4th. He didn't win right out of the gate. And right now, the two guys that I'm really looking at are the two guys that we started this video with, Goodvito and Martin, I think have that level of potential. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Is there any bodybuilder right now that you guys have your eyes on? Is it Carlos? Is it Goodvito? Is it somebody else, a young new guy that you think could be, the next guy that we talk about for years? And I keep forgetting about Neckzilla. I should really probably include him in that conversation as a new potential upcoming guy, but I forget about him because he doesn't compete. And next up in the news, here's another guy that I haven't talked a lot about recently, Regan Grimes. And he's another guy that he has kind of been talked about for really years now as having the potential to be the next big thing, even though up until this point, he still hasn't seemed to have realized that potential in competition. He's had some pretty good looks, but he hasn't really become one of the top guys yet. Regan Grimes, he announced, I guess this was 2 days ago, but he's weighing 300 pounds and that he's doing the New York Pro, which he would now be 18 weeks out from. And I actually really like Regan. Every interaction I've had with him, he always seems like such a nice guy. He's really positive. All the pictures he posts on Instagram, he looks really good. He still seems to have that potential, but I'm just always hesitant to talk about him as being the next big guy because it feels like we've talked about him. I mean, I feel like it's been since like 2017. We've been saying Regan could be the next big thing. So even though it might seem like it's not going to happen, you kind of learn with bodybuilding that anything can happen based on all the things that have happened throughout the history of this sport. I mean, take Brandon Curry, for example. I mean, there was a point in Brandon's career where he was thinking about switching to 212 from open. He was thinking about retiring. He's been competing since he's been a pro since 2010. And he's been competing at the Olympia since 2011. His first Olympia, he was 8th. And then he didn't win until 8 years later, 2019. So, I mean, sometimes it takes some time for these guys to really realize their peak because for a while, Brandon was pretty much out of that conversation as being a guy that could win the Olympia. And then he came back in 19 and won the whole thing. And he's continued to be, for the past 5 years or so, he's continued to be a staple in the top 2, top 5, this year slipping to 9th. But anything can happen. Maybe it just is going to take Regan some time. Because I think the thing that impresses so many people about Regan is his lines and his structure. When you talk about 300 pounds, and I've said this before, when we talked about Nick Walker recently posting that he was over 300 pounds, the structure makes a big difference. And with Regan being a taller guy and having a better structure to carry that kind of size, it's a different conversation when you're talking about a guy that's over 300 pounds that's 6 foot or over 6 foot, and a guy that's over 300 pounds that's 5'6". So Regan has the ability to carry a higher degree of size because he's got a bigger frame without sacrificing much of his structure. But I feel like a lot of times on stage, it still doesn't look like it's big enough. And it always seems like in the offseason, Regan pushes it. Like you can see it in his face that he's pushing his size, he's pushing his weight. But then when he does compete, I feel like a lot of times, even though, on the scale, he seems like he's really heavy, sometimes that's also the challenge of being a taller guy, is you've got to put on a lot of size to not look like slender next to the shorter guys that are 300 pounds in the off season. So it's kind of a benefit, and it's also kind of a curse, and that's kind of what we talk about with Samson Dauda being a taller guy, is he's kind of pushed it past that mark. We're talking about like 335 in the off season. So he's really filled out his frame. He is a taller guy, but Samson is not looking small next to anybody, because he carries it so well. So he's a taller guy that has really fully fleshed out his frame, and I think that's something that Regan has still been building to. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below about Regan Grimes' potential for 2025 at the New York Pro. And I should mention this guy too. There's another young up-and-coming guy. He's from Spain. His name is Joan Pradells. I'm sure it might have a different pronunciation than that, but he's only 29 years old. And he dropped a physique update yesterday that I saw a lot of people were talking about. And he's been a guy that's kind of been on the radar for a little bit. He hasn't really had any crazy placings or any crazy wins or done any like major big shows that he was a factor in. But I think a lot of people have been talking about his updates recently because of the fact that he seems to have put on a lot of size really, really quickly over the last year or two. And he talked about in this recent update that he plans to return for 2025. He plans to compete. He does not specify which shows he's going to be doing. But again, maybe he's a guy that we could see in a Detroit Pro lineup or a Pittsburgh Pro lineup. I'd love to see, I know it's like a pain for these guys that are from these other countries to travel to the States. And it is unfortunate that it's kind of limiting in that regard, that they kind of have to do, the European circuit of shows. But I would really like to see some of these young guys like him, like Joan, travel to a stateside show where there's going to be established guys, a deep lineup, and not, for lack of a better word, kind of random European pro. I mean, some of these shows, it's a lot of guys, honestly, that we haven't heard of. So even if he got a top 5 placing at maybe one of the smaller European shows, then placings like 6 through 15 are guys that we've never heard of. Even if he did a show like, Chicago or Tampa or New York, I bet we know every single person that's in the top 10 at those shows. So there is a little bit of a difference, and I do feel like that's part of the reason I don't talk about Joan as much, is we haven't really seen him in a serious mix. But he is a beast. I know he did a show that Michael Krizo was in. I don't think he placed super well at that show. But he's a beast, and people call him the Spanish mass monster. You can tell he's a really big dude. His delts are like out of this world crazy. And maybe he is a guy that we need to be talking more about in 2025. Maybe he's a guy that has a really breakout year. That's kind of, as this year begins, and we're starting to see some of these guys come out of the woodwork a little bit and start announcing what their plans are for 2025, start beginning their preps and posting their first physique updates. That's kind of what I'm thinking about as this year begins, is who's going to be the guy in 2025 that like blows our minds and is the next guy on the scene. Now, the final story that I've got for you guys today, the latest physique update at under 7 weeks out for Mike Sommerfeld, who I believe is the biggest challenger to Wesley Visser's Arnold Classic title defense. And this was an interesting update because one of the first things that I thought when I was watching this video is Mike looks really thick, like he looks big for a classic guy. Then I started reading the comments, and a lot of the comments were like, too big for classic, switch to open bodybuilding. And obviously, I don't think he's too big for classic because he was just runner-up at the Classic Olympia literal months ago. So obviously he fits within that standard, and we don't know what he's weighing, but I'm assuming he's not over, or at least not super over, but he is a shorter guy, so maybe he is pretty close to his limit. But it did make me wonder if they have a point. Like, you guys know I love to see crossovers in bodybuilding. And would he do well if he crossed over to open bodybuilding? I could see with this type of structure, I could see him winning a big show like the Arnold or, possibly the Olympia, and then saying, you know what, screw it, it's time for open bodybuilding. I've maxed out what I can do here in Classic. Let's see what I can do in Open. And this is a conversation that I think Chris Bumstead really opened the door to. And I think I would like to see more of these guys potentially explore their potential that is uncapped by a weight limit, especially when you have a guy like Mike that has a structure like this. What would, 20 or 30 more pounds of muscle look like on a frame that has a crazy tapered structure like Mike has? Because when I was reading these comments, one of the things that I was thinking about was the thing that we really haven't seen yet. We've mostly seen it from 212 to Open. But the thing that we really have not seen yet as far as a transition to open bodybuilding is a top Classic guy becoming a top Open Olympian. The closest thing that we've seen to that was Keon Pearson switching from Classic to 212 and then winning the 212 Olympia. But we haven't seen somebody yet make the jump from Classic to Open and become one of the top guys. Derek came from 212. Hottie came from 212. But we really haven't seen a top Classic physique Olympian become a top Open Olympian. Chris Bumstead doing Prague was really the first and only taste we've had of a top Classic guy doing a top Open show. Or I guess I should say against top Open guys. And we talked about it with Chris. We talked about it with Urs. But Chris and Urs are taller guys. And honestly, it would almost make more sense, even though you can view the potential a little bit differently with the taller Classic guys because they could put on more size in theory. It almost would make more sense that it would be a little bit of a shorter guy like Mike that is a little bit more limited by that weight cap. His max weight for Classic physique is much lower than Urs or Chris, and so therefore switching to an unrestricted division like Open, his potential would be opened up a lot more than a taller guy that has a higher weight cap, potentially. And I don't know if that's something that Mike has ever even discussed or addressed. This is just pure speculation here. But I wonder if it is something that we could see. And if it is going to be, if we do get that from a Classic guy, who is going to be the guy? And it almost would make sense, like I said, that it would be one of the shorter guys. It's a little bit more capped. But anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Like I said in the last video, I hope you guys are staying safe, staying warm. I'm still snowed in here, so I hope you guys are not. But yeah, I hope you guys are staying safe. And as always, like the video, subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification icon. And as always, I love you guys. Appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power signing out. All right, guys, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy the content. Also, check out my Instagram at NickStrengthPower, my Facebook page, which is simply Nick Strength and Power, my secondary YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Vlogs, for vlogs and bonus content that you will not see on this channel. And consider subscribing to my third YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Pokemon, which is all things Pokemon and trading card games, completely unrelated to this channel. So if you're into that, give that one a look. And all links to merchandise and social media will be in the description box below. If you guys want a Nick Strength and Power t-shirt, that will be in the Shopify link below. Have a great day.